If one day your parents refused to lend you $35,000 to save your life, what would you do? That's precisely what I went through. When I had only 3 months left to live, my parents refused to help me with that money. My dad said to me, "If you die, who am I supposed to get the money back from?" That cruel sentence cut off our relationship completely. While I was counting down the days I had left, the door to my hospital room opened, and the person who walked in was my grandmother. Her appearance changed everything. Stay with me. I'll tell you what happened in my life. Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia. I'm 32 years old and currently working as a sales director for a furniture company based in Chicago. Right now, I live with my husband John and our baby girl Mia, who's 9 months old, in a 3-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets. On weekdays, we focus on work and spend our evenings with Mia. If work isn't too hectic on weekends, our little family usually drives out to visit Grandma Carol. She lives in a cozy house in Oak Park, about a 30-minute drive from us. Those visits always bring me peace, especially when I see Grandma holding Mia in her arms, softly singing old lullabies. Our life right now is truly calm and peaceful, and I treasure every moment spent with the people I love the most, because just 2 years ago, I almost lost everything. That turning point didn't just threaten my life. It also exposed the true faces of everyone in my family. After that, my parents, my sister Natalie, and I became strangers, people who shared the same blood, but no longer held any real meaning to each other. And through it all, I realized that DNA doesn't define real family. It's defined by the ones who stand by you when you need them the most. The story that changed my life happened in May 2023, a little over 2 years ago. At the time, John and I had only been married for 3 months. After nearly 5 years of dating and being entirely in love, we were still in that honeymoon phase of marriage, where every day was filled with laughter and plans for the future. We started dreaming about having children after our spring wedding in a small church just outside of Chicago. John would talk about how he wanted to decorate the nursery, and I pictured myself teaching our kids how to ride a bike in Lincoln Park. We had even started putting money aside for college funds for children who didn't exist. But then out of nowhere, a storm hit. A sudden, devastating moment swept away every beautiful plan we had. It was a Saturday in May. I was sitting on the couch with John, watching The Godfather. Out of nowhere, a sharp, violent pain shot through my head like a bullet. I let out a cry and immediately started convulsing uncontrollably. Just before everything went black, I caught a glimpse of John's terrified face. His mouth was shouting something, but I couldn't hear a thing. And then everything faded to darkness. When I opened my eyes, the blinding white lights of the hospital forced me to squint. My head throbbed like someone was hammering from the inside. Looking around, I realized I was lying in a hospital room surrounded by medical equipment. Right next to my bed, John sat on a chair, his eyes red and puffy from crying. The moment he saw I was awake, he grabbed my hand and called my name in a trembling voice. "Cynthia, you're awake. Thank God." A little while later, I pressed him to tell me what had happened, but he just shook his head and cried harder. After I kept pushing, he finally broke the silence, his voice choked with emotion. You have aggressive brain cancer, Cynthia." The moment John said those words, a ringing filled my ears. The world around me blurred and felt distant. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Aggressive brain cancer at 30 years old. When life was just beginning, it meant I wouldn't have much time left to love John, chase my dreams, and live the life I had just started building. Lying there in that special care unit, for the first time in my life, I cried like a child. I wondered what would happen to John if I weren't there anymore. I thought about my dreams and ambitions that might never come true, but the most terrifying part was coming face to face with death, something I had never imagined would come so soon. While I was still drowning in dark thoughts, the door to my hospital room opened, and Dr. Peterson, a man in his early 50s, walked in, holding a thick stack of medical files. After checking the readings on the machines around me, he turned to me and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Cynthia, I'm going to be straightforward with you. You still can survive if you agree to join our experimental treatment program." Hope flickered in my eyes at those words, but before I could let myself feel relief, Dr. Peterson continued. "However, the cost is significant, $350,000 just for the initial phase of treatment. Insurance companies won't cover it since it's still experimental. The moment that enormous figure left his mouth, John immediately spoke up, his voice trembling. If we don't have the full $350,000, is there any other option? Dr. Peterson paused, visibly uncomfortable. After a few seconds of silence, he answered us directly. All we could offer is palliative care. So Cynthia would be kept as comfortable as possible, but it also means she won't have much time left. Based on current estimates, she has at most 3 months to live. Hearing 3 months made a fresh wave of fear crash over me. The most terrifying part about dying isn't the fact that it happens. It's knowing when it will happen. After Dr. Peterson left, the room went quiet. All that remained was the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the sound of John sobbing beside me. At that moment, I realized my survival now depended on a number, $350,000, an overwhelming life or death number. Neither of us could sleep that night, not even for a second. The hallway light seeped through the crack under the hospital door, casting faint, shifting patterns on the white walls. John sat beside my bed, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers somewhere beyond it. In the silence, he suddenly spoke with a determined voice. Let's sell the apartment. I've already done the math. We still have $150,000 in savings. We could get at least another $500,000 if we sell the place. That would be more than enough for your treatment. I shook my head slightly and let out a sigh. I didn't say anything in response. Around 11 p.m., John finally dozed off from sheer exhaustion. I lay awake in the dark, my mind spinning with conflicting thoughts. I kept asking myself whether I should go through with the treatment. $350,000, an enormous number. In those quiet moments, a selfish thought crept into my mind. Maybe letting that money go toward John's future was better. Maybe he could use it to rebuild his life and find happiness again. If we sold the apartment, he'd have no home left, just medical debt and memories. Around midnight, John suddenly jolted awake as if something had shaken him. He looked over and saw I was still awake. "What's wrong, Shamned?" he asked. "Why aren't you sleeping?" After a few seconds of hesitation, I spoke in a hoarse voice. "I've decided not to go through with the treatment." Hearing that, John sat up straight, his eyes wide with horror. He broke into sobs and cried out in despair. "If you give up on treatment, I'll die before you do." Seeing the man I loved cry like that shattered me into 1,000 pieces. In that moment, I realized love sometimes demands that we fight, even if the odds are almost impossible. In the end, I nodded and whispered to him, "All right, I'll do the treatment. We'll go through this together." I knew I had just made the most critical decision of my life, a decision that could change our lives in ways we could never predict. The next morning, Dr. Peterson permitted us to leave the hospital temporarily, but he gave us a severe warning before we left. "Cynthia, if you experience any unusual symptoms, severe headaches, nausea, or seizures, you need to come back immediately. Time is critical." Hearing those words, a chill ran down my spine as I realized I was living each day on a tightrope. We began planning to raise the $350,000 we needed back at the apartment. I first called Ryan Williams, my best friend since college, now working as a real estate agent. When I told him everything, there was a moment of silence on the line. Then his voice came through with steady determination. "Cynthia, don't worry about selling the apartment. I'll take care of everything. I'm not charging you any commission." Hearing that from Ryan filled me with an unexpected warmth. Maybe the luckiest thing in my life was having a friend like him. But what shocked me even more was what happened next. Ryan immediately transferred $50,000 to my account. He said it was a loan, interest-free. I could pay him back after I recovered. At that moment, I asked him, "Aren't you afraid you'll never get the money back? I could die at any time." Ryan answered instantly with a voice full of conviction. "I believe in you and John. You're the best woman I know, Cynthia." When I hung up the phone, my chest felt tight with emotion. In the darkest moment of my life, I finally understood what true friendship meant. John didn't waste a single moment. He called his parents in Milwaukee and told them everything about my condition. With the speaker on, I could hear his mother sobbing on the other end of the line. After calming down, John's parents said to him, "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll lend you $100,000. We're going to help save Cynthia." Even Grace, John's younger sister, who had just graduated and started working a few months earlier, called us through a shaky voice. She said, "John, I just emptied my savings. I have $15,000. Please take it to help Cynthia." Both John and I couldn't hold back our tears hearing Grace say that. She was just a young woman starting in life, yet she was willing to give away everything she had to help the sister-in-law she had only known for a few years. After doing the math, we had $315,000. We were still short $35,000. That's when I thought of my parents. They had just sold a piece of land in the suburbs of Chicago for $320,000. I hoped they still had the money and would be willing to help me in this desperate time. Without thinking twice, I took John's hand and said, "Let's go to my parents' house. They'll help us." John nodded and quickly joined me as we got in the car and headed over. As we drove, I had no idea that what was about to happen would become one of the most unforgettable moments of my entire life. I arrived at my parents' house around 5:12 p.m. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed Natalie's red car was parked in front. That was a clear sign the whole family was home. John squeezed my hand tightly as we stepped up the familiar front steps. He knew my relationship with my family had never been easy, but at that moment, we needed every bit of help we could get. The front door was unlocked, so we walked right in. In the living room, I saw my dad, Steve, and my mom, Linda, sitting on the couch watching the news. Natalie was at the dining table, tapping away on her laptop. They all turned to look at us, surprised. After a few greetings, I sat down across from them and began explaining everything about the seizure. The diagnosis of aggressive brain cancer, and the fact that I had only 3 months left if I didn't start treatment. As I spoke, I kept thinking my mom would break down in tears, that Natalie would be shocked, that my dad would bury his face in his hands at the thought of his daughter running out of time. But their reactions left me stunned. My dad was the first to speak. He looked at me with a scolding expression and said, "I told you you should have been more active. Now you see what happens when you don't care for your health." His words hit me like a slap across the face. This wasn't the time for blame or judgment. Then my mom shook her head and said in a cold, flat voice, "Don't worry. Medicine has come a long way. They'll fix it. You're a woman. Be strong. You're not a child." Natalie glanced up briefly and said with a detached tone, "You've still got 3 months. Just do whatever you want with the time you have." Their cold, indifferent responses made me feel like the ground had been ripped from under me. Standing there, surrounded by blood relatives who didn't seem to care whether I lived or died. I instinctively got up and grabbed John's hand to leave right then and there, but he gently pulled me back and whispered, "We need them. Just hang on a little longer." After a few moments of hesitation and battling with myself, I took a deep breath, looked at my dad, and said, "I'm just $35,000 short of what I need for treatment. Can you and Mom help me with that?" The moment I mentioned borrowing money, all three of their expressions shifted. They looked at each other with uncomfortable, almost irritated glances. No one said a word. The room went quiet, so quiet it felt suffocating. About a minute passed before my dad finally spoke, his voice hard and unyielding. "We don't have the money." Stunned, I asked him in disbelief, "Didn't you just sell the land outside the city for $320,000? This time my mom jumped in. She looked at us and said, "That money's for Natalie's house. We already put down the deposit. The rest is due next week." Hearing those words felt like someone had driven a knife straight into my chest. Once again, Natalie came first, the golden child. She had always been their priority in every decision. And now, even when I was staring death in the face, they still chose her. Seeing the devastation on my face, John stepped in and pleaded, "Just lend it to us for 1 week. When you need it, we'll pay it back immediately. We're borrowing from other people. We'll have the money soon. Cynthia needs treatment as soon as possible." After his sincere request, my dad stared at me for a few seconds, then firmly shook his head. I knew I had one last card to play. I looked at him and said, "If you won't lend it for free, let us borrow it with interest. I'll pay you whatever the bank charges." Even then, he just shook his head and coldly replied, "If you die, who should I get the money from?" That cruel question lit a fire in me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I exploded, "Dad, I'm your daughter." But he shouted right back without a flicker of emotion, "I don't invest in someone who's already dying." The room went dead silent, tense enough to suffocate. John was trembling beside me. Just then, Natalie spoke in her usual detached tone. "Don't you two still have an apartment? Sell it." I tried to stay calm and answered, "We're already putting it on the market, but it takes time." After a few seconds, Natalie gave a cold smile and said, "If you're willing to put it up as collateral for a $35,000 loan, then I'll lend you the money." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Our apartment was worth over $500,000, and she wanted to take it as collateral for just $35,000. It was clear this wasn't helpful. It was a calculated move to take advantage of me in my most desperate moment. The rage and stress triggered a blinding headache. I had to sit down, clutching my skull as if 1,000 needles were stabbing into my brain. Seeing my condition, John rushed to help me up and said firmly, "We're leaving." Before walking out, he turned back, locked eyes with the three of them, and said in a voice like ice, "Don't forget what you did to Cynthia today. One day, you'll pay for it." And with that, John led me out of the house I used to call home and drove straight to the hospital. My condition was getting worse. Sitting in the passenger seat, I kept asking myself, how had I survived all these years in a family where love had always been measured in dollars? That night, lying in my hospital room, I couldn't sleep for even a second. John had fallen asleep beside me from pure exhaustion. But I lay there restless, my mind spiraling with 1,000 thoughts. Questions kept repeating in my head. Why did they treat me like that? Why is Natalie always the one they put first? Even in a life or death situation like this? Those questions ran in circles in my mind, refusing to let me rest. I started thinking back to my childhood. Natalie always got the newest toys while I played with hand-me-downs. Her birthdays were big celebrations with cakes and crowds of friends. Mine were just quiet family dinners. In middle and high school, she was enrolled in a private school with piano lessons, ballet classes, tennis programs, you name it. I went to public school and was turned down whenever I asked to join extracurricular activities. By the time we got to college, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. My parents paid Natalie's full tuition and living expenses. Me? I had to earn a scholarship and work 3 jobs to afford tuition and rent. After graduation, I built my life from scratch, bought my car, bought my own home, built a career with nothing but grit and hard work. Every single thing I achieved came from my sweat and sacrifice. Meanwhile, Natalie got a financial safety net at every turn. From her first car to her failed attempt at launching a business, my parents were always there to catch her when she fell. And now, even when I was dying, they were still choosing her. What stung the most wasn't just their coldness that day. It was the bitter realization that after everything I'd done for them over the years, they still turned their backs on me. I remembered back in 2020 when Natalie was unemployed for 8 months after the marketing firm she worked at went under. I was saving to buy our apartment at the time, but when my parents told me about their situation, I didn't hesitate. I sent Natalie for $2,000 to help her get by. In 2018, when a storm wrecked my parents' roof, I covered the $3,000 bill to get it repaired. In 2022, when my dad wanted to replace his beat-up Honda Accord that had clocked over 200,000 miles, I gave him $5,000 toward a new car. Later that same year in October, my mom was hospitalized for 2 weeks with kidney stones. I sent her $1,000 to help with the medical bills. And that's not even counting the countless smaller moments. Holidays, birthdays, unexpected emergencies. I never said it was alone. I never asked for anything back. I just gave, because that's what family is supposed to do. While I gave freely and without expectation, Natalie did nothing but take. She never contributed a cent to anyone. She was like a money vacuum, always ready with a reason to ask for help from our parents, or from me. And yet they always chose her. Every time. In every major decision, it was Natalie who came first. And now, today, facing the possibility of my death, they still chose her. They chose to help her buy a house instead of helping their daughter fight for her life, even though I only had 3 months left. In that moment of pure anger and heartbreak, a wild thought flashed through my mind. What if I'm not even their biological daughter? The idea hit me so hard that I almost wanted to get a DNA test to find the truth. I looked over at John, still asleep beside me, with the tear streaks dried on his cheeks. And right then and there, I made a promise to myself. I'm going to survive this, no matter what it takes. The next morning, around 9 o'clock a.m., Dr. Peterson had just finished checking my vitals and stepped out of the room. A few moments later, the door opened again. I figured the doctor had forgotten something and was coming back in, but the person who walked through that door made me freeze in disbelief. It was Grandma Carol. She was 78 at the time, her white hair neatly tied back, but her eyes were still sharp and full of life. She wore her familiar navy blue knit cardigan and the polished black Oxfords she always liked. Seeing her there out of nowhere overwhelmed me in a moment when it felt like the whole world had turned its back on me. My grandmother showed up, the one person I knew would never abandon me. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't waste a second. With firm steps, she walked straight toward John and me. She pulled out 4 thick stacks of $100 bills from her old leather handbag, neatly bundled and tied tight. Looking directly into John's eyes, she said with calm but unwavering resolve, "This is $35,000. Go pay for Cynthia's treatment." John quickly stood up, his hands trembling as he took the money. He bowed his head in gratitude, thanked Grandma, then rushed out of the room to take care of the payment, leaving me alone with the woman who had just changed everything. Once John was gone, Grandma sat down on the plastic chair next to my hospital bed. She gently brushed her hand through my hair, just like she used to when I was a kid. That familiar, comforting touch nearly brought me to tears. After a few moments of silence, I asked her, "Curious, Grandma? Did John call you?" She looked at me with soft, loving eyes and answered, "John called me last night. I know everything, and don't blame him. I told him long ago, if anything serious ever happened, he needed to call me immediately." Hearing her say that filled me with overwhelming gratitude for John. He knew exactly what to do when everything felt hopeless. Grandma was always ready to show up when we needed her most. In the hospital room, Grandma asked in detail about my condition, the treatment plan, and reminded me to stay strong, to fight with everything I had to beat this disease. Just before she got up to leave, she suddenly turned to me and said, "Don't sell the apartment. Keep it. I'll take care of it for you." Her request caught me off guard. I looked at her, surprised, and said, "If I don't sell the apartment, I won't have enough money to pay everyone back." She didn't offer a long explanation. Instead, she looked straight into my eyes and said with unwavering firmness, "Focus on getting better. I'll handle the money." At that moment, a wave of hope and profound gratitude washed over me. My grandma, who had always been known for being strict and no-nonsense, had just given me a promise. And if there's one thing I learned about her, it's that when she gave her word, it wasn't something she would ever break. After she left, I immediately called Ryan and told him, "Ryan, hold off on selling the apartment. I've decided not to go through with it." After everything that had happened, I finally felt like I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I now had a powerful ally in this battle against the disease, Grandma Carol's unconditional love. After receiving the $350,000 upfront payment, I was quickly admitted into the experimental treatment program. On the first day of treatment, I lay in the hospital bed watching bags of chemotherapy drugs slowly drip into my veins, feeling like I was gambling everything on a fragile hope. The first few days were truly hell. The experimental chemo was twice as intense as the standard dosage, and it made me so nauseous I couldn't keep anything down. My hair fell out in large clumps, and my weight dropped from 132 pounds to just under 110. There were nights when I ran a high fever, my whole body trembling. John didn't leave the hospital even for a single day. He stayed up all night when I was in pain, patiently wiping the cold sweat from my forehead. In moments when I felt hopeless and wanted to give up, John would hold my hand tightly and whisper, "You have to fight. I need you to stay with me." It was John's words that gave me the strength to keep fighting this disease. Something miraculous happened. In the 4th week of the first round of treatment, during a routine checkup, Dr. Peterson entered the room with a bright smile, something I hadn't seen since I first met him. Looking at the MRI results, Dr. Peterson said to us, "Cynthia, I have good news. The tumor has shrunk by 40% compared to the original size. This result is beyond what we hoped for." Hearing that, John broke down in tears of joy. As for me, it felt like I had just been given a second chance at life. After so many days drowning in despair, I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. By the 6th week, my blood test results showed a significant drop in cancer markers. Dr. Peterson even permitted me to go outside for walks. By the 8th week, a true miracle had happened. The latest MRI showed the tumor had shrunk by 70%. Dr. Peterson couldn't hide his excitement as he announced, "Cynthia, this is one of the most successful cases I've ever seen with this experimental drug." Hearing those words, I knew that my risky decision to join the trial had saved my life, and the love and support from those around me had given me the strength to survive my darkest days. 2 months later, I officially completed the first round of treatment with results that far exceeded expectations. After being discharged from the hospital, John and I thanked everyone who helped us through the most challenging times. We drove to Milwaukee to visit John's parents. When they saw me walk into the house looking healthy and gaining some of my weight back, John's parents burst into tears of joy. His mother hugged me tightly and said with a trembling voice, "Thank God Cynthia's better." Over the past 2 months, they and Grace, John's younger sister, regularly visited me in the hospital. Every week they showed up bringing heartfelt encouragement. Seeing how worried and caring they were made me feel incredibly lucky to have a real family. In contrast, my parents and sister Natalie didn't visit even once. During the entire 2 months of treatment, they never called or even sent a single message to check on me. Their silence said everything about how much, or how little, I meant to them. Later on, John told me that my parents even went to my grandmother to scold her for giving me the $35,000. At the time, Grandma Carol told them straight up, "It's my money. I'll give it to whoever I want." That line from her made me laugh, but it also deeply touched me. I also didn't forget to thank Ryan, my best friend, who stepped in when I needed help the most. When I brought up paying him back the $50,000, Ryan shook his head and said, "Don't worry about that. Just focus on getting better." His gesture reminded me once again of the actual value of genuine friendship. After thanking Ryan, we went to visit Grandma Carol. Her wrinkled face lit up joyfully when she saw I was healthy again. She gently brushed my hair and said, "You're strong, Cynthia. I'm proud of you." I also called Aunt Kristen to thank her for visiting me a few times in the hospital, even though she lived in Milwaukee and had to travel quite a distance. Just as we left that afternoon, Grandma suddenly asked us to stay. Then she picked up her phone and called my dad and Aunt Kristen, insisting they come to her house the next morning. Over the phone, I heard her speak in a firm voice. "Be at my house tomorrow at 9 a.m. I want to make changes to my will." I was completely surprised by Grandma's sudden decision, but knowing how she was, I didn't dare ask any questions. That evening, she cooked a big dinner with chicken soup, roasted meat, and homemade bread to help me regain strength. John stayed in the kitchen with her for nearly 3 hours. They prepared the meal with special care. I felt deeply grateful in Grandma's small home's warm, cozy atmosphere. If she hadn't stepped in with that $35,000 right when I needed it, my condition might have gotten worse, and I might not even be here now. That night, for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep with a sense of peace after months of worry and fear. The next morning, at 9 a.m., the doorbell rang repeatedly. One group after another walked into Grandma's small house, and before long, the living room was packed. When my parents and sister Natalie saw me sitting beside Grandma, they all looked surprised. Their faces were cold and expressionless. Not a single word of greeting. I could feel their lingering resentment over Grandma giving me the $35,000. I had no intention of greeting them either. After everything that had happened, we were like strangers sharing the same room. Aunt Kristen's family, on the other hand, was completely different. As soon as she saw me, she rushed over, hugged me tightly, and said warmly, "Cynthia, I'm so glad to see you getting better. You've got to stay strong for the next 2 rounds of treatment." "Okay," I whispered, thanking her and promising I would keep fighting. At around 9:10, the doorbell rang again. A tall man, probably in his mid-40s, walked in wearing a black suit and carrying a leather briefcase. After leading him inside, Grandma introduced him to everyone. "This is Nicholas Parker, my attorney." Attorney Nicholas gave everyone a polite nod, then sat in the chair Grandma had pointed out. Once everyone had settled into their seats, Grandma suddenly turned to my father and asked in a stern voice, "Steve, tell me something. Have I ever played favorites between you and Kristen?" Her unexpected question left my father silent for a few seconds, clearly caught off guard. Finally, he replied, "No, Mom. You've always treated us equally." Grandma nodded at his answer, then followed up with another question. "Then why have you played favorites between Cynthia and Natalie?" At that, my father's face turned pale, though he tried to stay composed and responded, "I haven't favored anyone. I've always treated both kids fairly." Before he could finish, Grandma shouted, "Shut your mouth!" Her voice exploded through the room like a thunderclap. Everyone went completely silent. No one dared to move. She paused for a few seconds, collecting herself, then looked my father dead in the eyes and said, "Clearly and deliberately, you left Cynthia to die and used all but $320,000 to buy Natalie a house, and now you have the nerve to deny it." My mother then jumped in, trying to defend him. "But Mom, Cynthia's a girl. She's strong. She can take care of herself." Hearing that, Grandma suddenly let out a sharp, cold laugh, a laugh heavy with meaning. She looked directly at my parents and roared, "I've been waiting for that exact sentence for a long time." We were all stunned. No one understood what she meant just yet. A few moments later, she turned to Attorney Nicholas and said, "Nicholas, adjust the will for me. After I pass, this house will go to Kristen." My father froze, then shouted in shock, "Mom, you can't do this." Now, Grandma was truly angry. She stood up and replied clearly and forcefully, "Your wife just said Cynthia is strong and can care for herself. Well, I also have 2 children, Steve and Kristen. Steve is strong. He can take care of himself too." With those words, I fully understood what Grandma was doing. This was her way of teaching my parents a lesson about fairness. My father didn't dare argue. He turned to my mother with a look of complete blame, then faced Grandma and pleaded, "Mom, we were wrong. Please forgive us." But no matter how much they begged, Grandma didn't waver. She stared straight at my father and said firmly, "It's done. Take your wife and daughter and leave this house. If you don't, never call me Mom again and I'll call the police." My mother seemed to want to argue more, but my father motioned for her to stop. He knew that once Grandma had made up her mind, there was no changing it. Ultimately, the 3 of them left the house in silence and shame. 8:59 a.m., 8/27/2025. After the sound of their car engine faded away, Aunt Kristen stepped forward and said to Grandma, "Mom, I don't want Steve's share of the estate. Give it to Cynthia instead." Grandma gave a gentle smile and replied, "Cynthia already has a different share." Then she pulled a checkbook from the drawer, wrote down a number, and handed the check to me. She said, "This is for your treatment from me. Take it and pay off all your debts." When I took the check from her hand, John and I were too stunned to speak. The amount written on it was $800,000, an incredible sum we had never dreamed of. As I tried to refuse, overwhelmed by how much it was, Grandma reached out and said, "Take it. You deserve this." Knowing there was no point arguing with her, we accepted the gift with a joy that words couldn't fully express. That day, with Aunt Kristen's family by our side, we cooked together and shared a meaningful dinner with the people who truly felt like family. In the warmth of that evening, I realized that family isn't defined by blood. It's determined by the ones who choose to stand by you no matter what. After receiving the $800,000 from Grandma, I quickly paid back everything I had borrowed from my in-laws, Grace, and my best friend Ryan. They all firmly refused when I offered to include some interest as a thank you for their help. John's parents made it clear that it was never a loan. Grace laughed and said she lent me the money out of love, not as a business deal. Ryan even turned down the $5,000 in interest I had calculated, insisting that friendship isn't something you measure in money. Their actions helped me realize a powerful truth. Sharing DNA or blood doesn't make someone family. Real family comprises the people who show up for you when you're at your lowest, without asking for anything in return. With the money Grandma gave me, I felt a new confidence in being able to afford the remaining 2 rounds of treatment. But the joy didn't last long. Trouble wasn't far behind. During an argument with Aunt Kristen over the inheritance of the house, my father accidentally found out about the large sum Grandma had given me. That same day, Aunt Kristen called me, sounding regretful, and told me the whole story. My father had called and demanded that she give up her right to the house. And in the heat of the moment, she'd yelled at him and accidentally let slip about the $800,000. Realizing her mistake, she immediately called to apologize and warned me to be cautious. Just as she predicted, 2 days later, my parents and Natalie showed up at the hospital during my second round of treatment. They demanded that I split the money evenly among the family, arguing that everyone had a right to it since it came from Grandma. Seeing how stressed I became, John immediately called hospital security to have them removed. But he didn't stop there. He also filed for a restraining order on my behalf. After we presented the whole story, from their refusal to help when I was on the brink of death to their harassment during treatment, the court approved our request. My parents and sister Natalie were legally prohibited from contacting me for the rest of my life. The day I received the official paperwork from the court, I felt like a weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I was free from people who called themselves family, but had only ever brought pain. 3 months later, after completing my final round of treatment, Dr. Peterson delivered the best news I had ever heard in my life. I was completely cancer-free. When Grandma heard the news, she hosted a small celebration at her house to honor the moment. She decorated the living room with yellow streamers, the color of hope, and prepared a cake with the words, "Welcome back to life, Cynthia," written across the top. I invited John's family, Ryan and Aunt Kristen and her family, to join us. Seeing all the people who had stood by me during my darkest days gathered together in that small room filled my heart with emotion. Standing among my loved ones, I spoke with a choked-up voice. I know no words of thanks could ever truly express my gratitude. Because of all of you, I got the chance to keep living, to come back to the people I love. The party that day was filled with warmth, laughter, light-hearted stories, and the happy glow in everyone's eyes. Ryan cracked us up with hilarious college stories. John's family shared plans for the future, and Grandma sat quietly, watching it all unfold with a proud smile. As night fell and guests began to head home, I looked around the room and realized this was the happiest celebration of my life. Not because of the food or decorations, but because I was surrounded by unconditional love, the kind of love money could never buy. 2 years have passed like a dream. Our life now is more peaceful than ever, thanks to the arrival of Mia, our sweet 9-month-old daughter. Her giggles each morning have entirely transformed the atmosphere in our apartment, making life feel meaningful and full of joy. Our days follow a steady rhythm that I've come to cherish deeply. Every morning, John and I have breakfast by the window overlooking the park, while Mia sits in her high chair, clutching her bottle. Her giggle whenever the Chicago sunlight filters through the maple leaves always makes me smile. After breakfast, I kiss my husband and daughter goodbye and head to work, while John, a freelance graphic designer, starts his day at home caring for Mia. In the evenings, after a long day filled with meetings and sales reports, I come home excited to be with my family. I first scoop Mia into my arms and kiss her forehead, breathing in that soft, sweet scent only babies have. We cook dinner together in our small kitchen, where John's laughter blends with the pans sizzling and Mia's babbling from her playchair. Those evenings usually end with us curled up on the sofa watching a movie, Mia fast asleep in my arms. If work isn't too hectic on weekends, we often drive out to visit Grandma Carol. We share dinner with her and sit around telling old stories. As for my parents and Natalie, I thought I had cut off all contact after the restraining order. But one weekend afternoon, while I was playing with Mia in the living room, the doorbell suddenly rang. Looking through the peephole, I was stunned to see the 3 of them standing there. I opened the door to find them looking worn and aged. This time, the one who was sick was Natalie. She had the same aggressive brain cancer I once battled, a clear sign that this disease truly runs in our family's genes. Despite everything they'd done, hearing that my sister had the same illness stirred something in me. My parents and Natalie dropped to their knees in front of me, admitting their mistakes and begging for $350,000 to help pay for her treatment. Seeing them kneeling before me was hard to bear. I asked them to stand up, then looked them in the eyes and said, "Have the 3 of you forgotten what happened 2 years ago when I came to ask for just $35,000?" That question left them completely silent. Not wanting to drag out the moment, I told them to go and warned that I'd call the police if they kept bothering us. Watching them walk away in despair, I still felt a deep sadness. Even though I knew I'd made the right decision, when I told Grandma what had happened, she asked me to investigate it. After confirming that Natalie was indeed ill, she and I went to the hospital that very afternoon. She paid the full $350,000 for Natalie's treatment and asked the hospital to notify my parents. On the way home, she said to me, "Cynthia, you were right to refuse to help them because they once refused to help you." I nodded quietly. A few seconds later, she added, "But Natalie is still my granddaughter. I have to help her." Hearing that, I replied softly, "Thank you for understanding, Grandma." She smiled and nodded, her eyes full of warmth. Through what Grandma did, I was reminded once again that genuine love holds the power to forgive, even when justice has already been served. After finding out that Grandma had paid the $350,000 for Natalie's treatment, my father drove to her house that night. He stood at the door, ringing the bell repeatedly, begging to see her. When Grandma finally opened the door, he immediately dropped to his knees on the front steps and spoke in a choked voice. "Mom, thank you for saving Natalie. I'm sorry. I've spent all this time thinking you were unfair to me." Looking down at her son, kneeling at her feet, Grandma Carol didn't show the slightest emotion. She stared at him coldly for a few seconds, then said in a firm, unshaken voice, "Go home." Don't let me see your face again." With that, she slammed the door shut, leaving my father alone, still kneeling in the darkness of the Chicago night. When Grandma told me what had happened, I understood something deeply. Some actions in life can't be forgiven, no matter how sorry you are. After everything Grandma did, I felt deeply grateful for her unconditional love. She showed me that real love has no conditions, even when it's met with betrayal and pain. I hope that once Natalie recovers, she'll visit Grandma and thank the woman who saved her life when the family no longer had the means to pay. Maybe this experience will help her understand the true meaning of love and sacrifice. I'm not sharing this story to blame or speak poorly of my family. Everyone makes their own choices, and they have to live with the consequences of those decisions. I want to say this. We often confuse blood family with soul family. Real family isn't defined by shared DNA, but by love, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. Sometimes strangers become our true family, while those who share our blood can feel like strangers. What matters most is recognizing and holding on to the people who genuinely love us. Life has taught me that genuine love always comes back to you, and selfishness always has a price. Live in a way that honors the love you're given. That's the end of my story. Before I say goodbye, I have one question I'd like to ask you all. If you were in my grandmother's shoes and Natalie was seriously ill, would you have spent $350,000 to save her, just like my grandma did? I'm truly curious to hear your thoughts on this. Please share your perspective in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to support us in future stories. Each one carries a meaningful lesson about life. Thank you for patiently listening to my story.